name is Rowan Workman. I'm the MAP manager, and I'd like to thank you all for coming down on this glorious spring evening. Tonight, we have got a cracker of an event for you with Sally-Ann Williams from Google, kindly making the flight down from Sydney. But before I introduce the speakers in a bit more detail, I would like to mention that this event is obviously being recorded, and so if you don't wish to be part of the picture, it's probably best to move to the side of the venue. And if you could also please switch your mobile phones to silent, that would be greatly appreciated. So Sally-Ann Williams, like I said, has kindly flown down from Sydney. She is the Engineering Community and Engagement Manager. And what that means is that she's broadly responsible for three areas: getting more kids at schools to learn coding, engaging with universities and developing research for Google and other areas in technology at universities, and also a key driver behind the Startup Australia initiative, which I'm sure she'll speak a lot about tonight. The format for this evening is we're going to have Sally-Ann interviewed by our very own Charlie Day, who is effectively in charge of innovation and entrepreneurship at the university. Charlie is the program director for Carlton Connect, which is the program or the project to change or develop the former Royal Women's Hospital, or the former on the corner of Grattan and Swanston Streets, into a centre for innovation and entrepreneurship. And so the format for this evening is that we'll have Charlie interview Sally-Ann Williams, and then we'll also open up the floor to some questions. So we'll have a couple of roving microphones going around. If you could just speak into the microphone so we can capture the audio and ask your question, that would be great. But without further ado, please welcome Sally-Ann and Charlie.
That's great.
Hi.
Thanks very much, Ron, and thanks very much to everyone for coming. We've got a bit of a lopsided audience, so most people are over that side of the room, so apologies over this side of the room. I'll get to look at you guys, and Sally can look at you guys. We'll try and spread it around. So as Rowan said, I'm going to have a conversation with Sally for the next little while, and while we're doing that, you can be germinating some questions, and then I'll throw to you guys for some questions. We've got, I think, an hour, a bit over an hour to have a conversation, and then there's going to be some more drinks and food outside, so I don't want to keep you from that for too long. So, Sally, why don't we start with the Dorothy Dixer that such interviews start with. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be in your current role at Google.
Yeah, so for me it's actually a little bit of a roundabout story. I was actually working at the University of Sydney and I'd been involved in setting up a new faculty and a program there called the Graduate School of Government, and doing all sorts of really crazy and wonderful things there that were outside the traditional university model and traditional models that are held around Australia. And it was great, but it was about 3 years into it and it was kind of starting to be the same thing for me. And so I was kind of looking for a new opportunity. And my husband actually, so this is not a story everybody knows, my husband actually Googled for jobs at Google for me and came up and said, you should go work at Google, because you're always like the one when we're out, you're Googling things, you love it, you talk about it being your dream job. And he said, the only other job you ever talk about being your dream job is being the fantail wrapper girl that researches the fan facts on fantail wrappers. Random, I know. And so, yeah, so there was a job going there. The team was really small. It was 7 years ago in Australia. And the job was kind of very broad. And I had no idea what it was, but I was like, I just want to work at Google. I don't really care about the job. And so I applied, and about 8 weeks later was offered a position there and started. So, yeah, kind of crazy. My husband, I should be nicer to him and thank him more often, probably.
And you mentioned that Google was small 7 years ago, but it's grown a lot since then, and not many people may know the breadth of what happened. So tell us a bit about Google in Australia today.
So Google's really interesting. For those of you, how many people know the Google Australia story? Excellent, only a couple of you. So Google Australia actually started as a sales organisation, and Kate Vale was the head of sales back then, and she started selling AdWords from her living room, basically. And then we got a few employees, and we eventually moved out of her living room into serviced offices. What happened then a little bit later, and the start of the engineering office and the engineering team, which I'm part of, was we had an acquisition of a small company called Where2 Technologies. It was basically 4 engineers that had come up with this little idea around maps and mapping and online maps that they thought might be cool. And they sold to Google. And that was the start of the engineering side of the organisation in Google Australia. Where2 Technologies actually ended up being basically the foundation of Google Maps globally. and the start of that really big. When I joined the company, there was about 11 engineers in the office and about 50 or so sales and marketing folks, and I was number 68. So really, really small. You knew everybody. It was a fantastic environment. It still is, but I don't know everybody anymore. And in the last 7 years that I've been there, we've actually grown to be about 1,000 people in Sydney, and about half of those are engineering. So we've had a ridiculously up and to the right curve of engineering growth, if you like, which is really exciting. And what that's meant for us is that we've actually grown the scope of work that we work on. So when we started, we were focused on maps, and that was pretty much the only engineering team there. There was a few networking engineers that were coming on board, but that was it. Now we actually work on geo. We have a really big team that works on a number of strategic global initiatives for Google in the geo space. We work on Chrome, we work on Google Apps, we work on social, so Google Plus and Blogger. We work on networking engineering. We have a really big networking engineering team. We have site reliability engineers. We have, there's so many more. We have security engineers. It's absolutely diversified. So it's a really, really significant R&D centre, both in Australia but also for Google globally. It's a huge, huge investment, and sometimes that we don't talk about it often, so people don't really know, mainly because we're too busy building things. But it's a really significant investment by Google in Australia. And I think one of the things that excites me so much is the growth and the opportunities that we've had. We're a great big, it's kind of cheesy to say family, but we're almost like that in engineering. I'm going back tomorrow to go away with them all for 2 days for an off-site, and that's going to be a lot of fun. But it's really interesting. We work on global projects and solving global problems. It's been a long day. But everything we're doing is building global projects and building things for global reach and a global audience. It's not localization. So it's a really, really exciting place to be.
And do you think that there's something that characterises, I guess, Google Australia versus Google the rest of the world? Are there things that,
Absolutely.
when you go to Mountain View, people say, oh, those Aussies, they're X?
Yeah, actually there is. I think one of the strongest Australian character traits that I see is we're kind of a bit cheeky, right? We do stuff, we just get things done. There's a great Google expression that we say internally of like, just do it and ask for forgiveness later. Don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. That really, we've taken that to a whole new level in Australia. We do all sorts of things when the time zone's at our advantage and people might be asleep and go, let's just see what happens overnight if we send this email and pitch this project. So I think we really take advantage of that. I think the other thing that really impresses me about Google Australia, and I work globally, so I work with lots of teams overseas, we are of a significant size now that you can't know everybody in the organisation. But one of the things that we do is we have a great volunteer sort of spirit. People get on board with helping out. I remember a few years back when the bushfires happened in Victoria down here. And one of the things over the weekend, we were watching that in Sydney, and a lot of our engineers and a lot of us personally have friends and family that were affected. And, watching this devastating occurrence happening and going, this is ridiculous. We should be able to do something. We should be able to do something. And you might think, well, what can a technology company do? Nothing, right? But what was happening was we noticed that you couldn't get any information from the Rural Fire Services website because so many people around the world were trying to get information from there that the server it just couldn't cope with the load on it. And it went down, it was serving 404 errors. So no one could find out what was going on. Should you evacuate? Shouldn't you? Are my family safe? Are they not? It was just a massive problem. And, I was online over the weekend. There was a bunch of us chatting going, this is just tragic. And, what we do and what I love about Australia is what we did was a bunch of engineers said, well, you know what, we can fix this. We've got a mapping team. We know how to get this data. We know how to put it on a map. And guess what? We've got a scalable solution. We've got an App Engine team here. We'll run it on App Engine. Let's hack something together and let's put this out there so the public knows what's going on. And within 24 hours, we've done that and put this up there as a crisis response and a crisis map. And we're sort of putting links back to the Red Cross and to service agencies so that you could find out and track people and track data. And that was actually one of the first times we'd done that globally, and that just came out of the initiative of 3 or 4 people going, we've got to fix this and we've got to do something, and our lawyers just saying, do it, ship it, I will help you. That was not something planned. That was just out of a heartfelt response to do something, and now we have a crisis team globally and we have an engineer dedicated to the crisis team in Sydney who responds to these things. And that's probably been one of the things that I think, I love the fact we just did that. And it was the right thing to do, and we could do it. And so, you know, it's probably one of the things I get most proud of. I get a little bit, I'm like a little proud mother hen, but I do get really proud of those instances, because that's the times when I think we're really making a difference and helping people in an amazing way.
And Rowan mentioned briefly in the introduction what some of your formal roles and informal, I guess, roles within Google are. And some of those are, you know, perhaps not what you might think a big corporate necessarily would do. I understand you work a lot in school-age children and trying to educate them. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of your work in those areas?
Absolutely. This is something we do globally. It's about encouraging kids to code, and it's actually about programs that help and empower teachers to teach coding in the classroom. It's not about our technology. There is no Google technology required to be used in any of these programs. The biggest program that we have that I'm involved with, that we have a really strong presence here in Australia running, is called CS for HS. And it's computer science for high schools. And what we do is we fund awards or we fund programs that university partners run, and they run 2 to 3 day hands-on workshops for teachers to go to free of charge, where they learn how to code, they learn all sorts of crazy, wonderful things. They get takeaway material that they can go back and plug and play into the classroom. The only part of that will be Google branded is the actual the symposium itself with the workshop with the university partner. The material they use, they teach them Scratch, they teach them Alice, they teach them Python, they teach them how to play with Arduino kits, they do FIRST robotics, they do all sorts of crazy, wonderful things that is just designed to excite and encourage kids to get passionate about coding and explore it as an opportunity. We don't talk about this stuff a lot publicly, because you know what, it's about inspiring the kids and the teachers, and it isn't about brand for us. We can leverage our brand to do good in that space, but this is about doing the right thing. And so Melbourne University is actually one of the recipients of that grant, and they've been running CS for HS workshops now. This will be their 3rd one this year, and they're fantastic workshops. Like the teachers go away so inspired and so encouraged and so thankful, because there isn't a lot of professional development in that space. So I love it. I'm very passionate about it. Don't get me on my soapbox.
And I guess that's Google taking the long view, because if I remember rightly, Google's mission was to organise the world's information, and I think still is the mission officially. Yep. That's a bit of a stretch from that mission. Where does Google draw lines, or how do you think about drawing lines?
Lines are very blurry at Google, which is great. And I think that stems from our culture. Our organisational structure is very blurry. Yes, we have a reporting line, but that doesn't mean the good ideas come from the top down. They actually come bottoms up, and it's encouraged to do that. I think for us, the reason that we invest in that space, and the reason that we are working with startup ecosystems, and the reason that we are encouraging innovation, is that actually this ecosystem's a word that gets used a lot, that kind of gets misused and abused a little bit. But to be really honest, it is about building a thriving ecosystem. There is something about when you're in an environment where there is a lot of competition, there is a lot of bright people doing really crazy, wonderful, exciting things, that makes you want to be better, that makes you want to work harder, that makes you want to do something new and exciting, and it really pushes you on. And we want that environment. One of the things that I've really noticed in 7 years in Sydney is when we were small, you know, it was an exciting place to be and it was great, but now that we're big and there's like 400 engineers roaming the halls doing stuff, it's even more exciting. And what's even more exciting, and I was mentioning this earlier, is, you know, I go out to get coffee deliberately because there's a great big startup co-working space up the road from me in Sydney called Fishburners, and I'll go out the road to get coffee because there's a whole bunch of people from the co-working spaces adjacent to us that will get coffee at similar coffee shops, and I walk out there and I hear about what they're doing and I get excited and I want to go back and do something cool as well. So it's about actually creating an ecosystem where there's a lot of give and take, and by that I mean, you know, the thing that we would love to see is engineers, and we have seen some leave Google Australia, and they haven't left Australia, they've gone out to leave and do a startup, which is awesome. And some of those will come back eventually, maybe. But we want to see that ecosystem where people can flourish and truly have an absolutely engaging and exciting experience in their careers, in their companies, in whatever they're doing in Australia. So, yeah, it's very blurry. It's fun though.
Ecosystems tend to be like that.
Yeah.
The boundaries are always a bit blurry. Let's talk a bit about the ecosystem. I mean, you spend a lot of time travelling around Australia. You've seen the startup ecosystem, I guess, in all of the major capital cities and maybe some of the regional centres.
Yep.
What is your observations about our ecosystem? Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? What should we be thinking about?
That's a very big question, so you'll have to keep me on track. But I think one of the things that really excites me is the fact that the ecosystem is, at the moment, I think if you were thinking about a startup, we're on a growth curve right now. 5 years ago in Australia, I would have had to run around to try and find not a room of developers. I could find a room of developers, but they're all working for big companies, or they're all working for banks or other organisations, right? And that was good and that was exciting. But for me to find a bunch of startups and people wanting to do crazy, exciting things and pursue their own passion and their own dreams and solve big problems, that was actually much harder to find that. Now, not every second person, that's definitely not a
Every
true
person in this room.
But every person in this room, hopefully. But now that actually excitement is, I could be at an event every single night that's actually transformed from being just a developer-focused event to being a startup-focused event. Still the same developers in the room, but they've changed what they're working on. And I think the other thing that's really exciting for me is people that have come out of their home offices. They've come out of their garages, so to speak, and they've come into co-working spaces and to other places, and we are creating these communities. And I think one of the things that I think is most important for this ecosystem in Australia and in every centre, be it regional or in the capital cities, one of the most important things is to build a culture and to build a community. When we talk to startups and say, what's the biggest challenge? Funding is one thing that gets brought up, but the second thing that always gets mentioned, and this one is often number one, depending on the context of the conversation when you ask the question, is mentoring. People don't have mentors and leaders to follow in this space. Australia's got some great success stories out there in the startup community, but they're kind of small. There's there's a very small number of them at the moment. And so with the growth of people wanting to do things in this space, it's really, really hard for them to mentor everybody. That doesn't scale. So I think the development of communities and co-working spaces, programs like MAP, events like tonight, actually fill one of those gaps, right? This is kind of informal mentoring. Not that I'm mentoring you, but we're going to have a conversation. And after this, we'll have drinks and we'll have a conversation. And somebody will say something to you that will be relevant to your situation. You have an opportunity to ask a question and have it answered by somebody that may be 6 months or 12 months down the track from you, further ahead from where you are. And I think creating those opportunities and environment for that to occur is actually going to help us get more success stories on the board. And once we have more success stories, it's that success breeds success. A rising tide floats all boats sort of thing. So, those are the things that I think are really cool. I do want to say, though, because I don't think people that have been plugging away at this get enough acknowledgement. There are people in your ecosystem here in Sydney, in Adelaide and other places that have been working very, very hard for many, many years to grow the tech startup community specifically. And they might not be the people that you see at the front of the room. They might not be the people that you see speaking at every event, but they've been running meetups for years. Silicon Beach meetups in Sydney and Melbourne have been going forever, it seems like. And the guys that have been faithfully doing that, we're here today. All of you are in this room today because they've been plugging away for that so long. We are a product of those that have gone before us, and we should be incredibly grateful and thankful for that. And I don't get a chance to say that very often, so I'm going to say it wherever I can.
Fantastic. And you mentioned, finding roomfuls of developers has been a challenge, and bearing in mind you're from Google,
Yes.
Is it all about developers, or if you're not a techie, you're not a developer, is there a spot for you in the ecosystem?
Absolutely there is. I think it's definitely not just about developers, although the percentages or the stats do sort of suggest globally that a tech background will really help you in a startup ecosystem, especially because startups, by definition that we sort of refer to them, are tech-based. I think if you're not, one thing I would say is if you're not a technical, if you don't have a tech background, you have absolutely no excuse for not being tech savvy. And by that I don't mean using products technically, but I mean understanding the difference between the back end and the front end and what that really means. knowing a little bit about the languages, knowing a little bit about the infrastructure. Anyone can learn that. There's some great resources out there. General Assembly puts stuff online all the time about that and explaining the differences. You need to have some of that nuance and understanding. But I think any startup does need a balance of people. You can take technical co-founders and they can build something and it'll be great, but somebody's going to have to get it out the door. Somebody's going to have to go hustle and sell. Somebody's going to have to look for money. Somebody's going to have to go and sign on customers. Now, it's not that you can't do that if you're a technical co-founder, but it's not necessarily a lot of the tech co-founders I know's natural world or place of comfort. So honestly, having somebody that is brings that experience and brings that diversity of thought and opinion into a startup is a really good thing.
You mentioned one of the things that startups need to do is raise funding, and it's an oft-repeated theme in Australia that we lack for good venture capital and good investment support for startups. Is that something we should be worried about? Is that something that keeps you up at night?
Oh, look, it doesn't keep me up at night. I'm sure it keeps a lot of people up at night. I think it's a yes-no answer with that. I know a lot of people that have started and bootstrapped and gone on very, very well till they've gone to go for Series A, and they've skipped that initial seed round. They've just gone straight to Series A. So I don't think funding should be a reason that you don't start up. If that's the only reason you're not starting up, then I kind of question where you're at with that, because you should be able to get something to MVP with hopefully with very little money if you're looking at a tech startup anyway. If you're looking at biomed or something else, that's a different story. So let me be really clear. I'm not talking about that because that's a much harder and longer problem, and it's a lot more expensive. There isn't enough funding. However, is that a blocker? I don't believe it should be. Will we see more funding come to Australia? I think we will when we get more success here. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. If we put more money into it now, will we get more success? Maybe. But we've got to get the success and the runs on the road to get people coming to us and funding us. One of my things that I would love to see the ecosystem move to in the next sort of 5 years is being a little bit like Israel in this boat. So one of the conversations that you often have is, you've got to go to the valley to get money. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of a little bit true now, although, there's investors coming down here all the time, and Bill Ty's coming back at the end of the month, and doing a roadshow around Australia, so you should go to those events and meet him. But there's a lot of investors that are coming down here. One of the things that Israel's done really well is they've made it so compelling to go there that people go to them for funding. And I think that's something, if we really put our heads down, if we get some more success on the ground here in Australia and we really work hard at it, there's no reason that we can't bring a whole bunch of investors from anywhere in the world down here. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic in that space.
And you mentioned that you've got an investor coming over from the US, and I know Google's got some big plans or supporting some big plans for Startup Spring. Do you want to tell us a bit about
Absolutely.
that and what that's going to be?
I'd love to. So I should say that's about StartupAus. Google's involved. Who's heard about StartupAus? Excellent. Okay. So StartupAus is a not-for-profit. That's whole mission is to help grow the tech ecosystem, or the tech startup ecosystem in Australia. It came out of a forum that we ran earlier this year, where we had 50 people from around Australia in a room in Sydney and sort of said, what are the levers we need to push to help really accelerate the growth of the ecosystem? Is it regulatory? Is it money? Is it success? Is it awareness? What is it? And one of the big things that came out of that was this need to help amplify the great things that are already happening in the ecosystem. And so StartupAus was formed. And one of the biggest initiatives, or our first big initiative that we're really focusing on that's outward focused or public focused, is Startup Spring. And that's a festival of events that's coming up. It's starting on the 17th of September. Gosh, it's late. 17th of September through till about the 9th of October. StartupSpring2013.org, by the way, is where you can go for that. But it's a festival of events all around Australia. As of today, we have over 75 events happening around Australia. That includes Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Wollongong, I think, Newcastle, I know, Canberra, Tasmania, Adelaide, Perth. So there's a lot happening. It's a grassroots initiative. So MAP is hosting an event, I know, as part of that. Haven't got the site up yet, but Rowan will send that all to you, dobbing you in for work there. But the goal of that event is to help people outside of this room know that we exist, that each and every one of you exist and are working on something and working on building a startup. One of the things that I often hear is once you're in the community, it's quite vibrant, and you could be at you could probably be at 3 other events tonight in Melbourne. I'm guessing that there's at least 3 meetups happening. Would that be fair to say? Yeah, probably about that, right? It's the same in Sydney. On any night of a given week, there's like 3 or 4 events that are tech focused or startup focused around the place, and I think that's a wonderful, wonderful situation. But if you're outside that community, you don't even know it exists sometimes, and that's kind of crazy. So one of the things we want to do is help raise awareness of what's already existing. We want to shine a light on the co-working spaces. We want to shine a light on programs like MAP. We want to shine a light on what Google's doing. We want to shine a light on things that are already happening in the ecosystem and get people invited in and get them to come in and be a part of it and see that this is an opportunity that they could start a company too. So it's a great opportunity. One of the other things that we're doing, and we've been doing for a little while, and we're trying to push and gain traction, is that if you're at a startup event or if you're doing a startup and you've got some great news to share or you want beta testers, is jump on board, tweet it and add the hashtag StartupAus. StartupAus, not OZ. But add the hashtag, let people know what's going on. We've got journalists now that are following that hashtag and starting to sort of pick up on stories that are happening around the place. And I think once we start getting this and raising awareness and coming together and shouting out about the success and what we're doing in this space, people outside will start to notice. And then we can go and advocate for things that we need, both internally in Australia, be it in government or things like that, or going to the US and saying, hey, look at what's happening in Australia. You guys should really come down here and start taking us seriously. Have a look at what's happening in some of these ecosystems. There's some really bright spots here that need some focus and some attention. And honestly, it's a good bet for your funding. So that's kind of what we're trying to do in that space. And we invite, membership is by participation. It's really easy. Join the conversation and get involved. It's not a gated community in any way. We have about 50 volunteers, I would say, around Australia at the moment, working on Startup Spring and working to make that successful. So it's looking really exciting.
Fantastic, and we're very excited that there is going to be an event in this very venue, I think, as part of that venue. Festival. This is going to be my last question, and then I'll throw over to you for your questions, so I hope you've been dreaming them up. My last question, you mentioned multiple events on the night. It's growing incredibly rapidly. Is there a bubble in startup activity in this country?
I don't know. Probably, to some extent.
And should we be worried about that?
Oh, look, I don't worry about bubbles until they come close to bursting or bursting. It's kind of a negative thing to kind of focus on that side of it, right? But I think some things will thrive and other things will pass away, right? Some events are only going to have a limited lifespan, and that's okay. I think what we look at is where things are useful and where they're engaging and they help growing things, then we keep focusing on that and evolving. To give you an example of what Google's done, how we've evolved in this space, 3 years ago, all of the work that I was doing in this space was developer outreach. So we ran things like Google Developer Days. It was all focused on our technology and outreach and things like that. It wasn't focused on talking about tech startups or running events with having founders sitting up here and talking about things. That's completely changed now. We still do that activity and that work, but it's in a very different space. And instead of working just with partners in big companies, we're actually spending times in co-working spaces and working with developers and running programs for startups that actually help them and engage them. And that's we've transformed what we're doing in that space, both locally and globally. And I think that you'll find the tech startup ecosystem will do that as well. The events will change over time, and that's okay. Like, that's a natural progression. Just like a startup grows, hopefully, and evolves into a big company or a bigger company, so should the ecosystem. I think there will be a lot of failure along the way, right? Most tech startups don't succeed. We know that. And certainly founders don't usually succeed their first time around. I think what we need to do is normalise that and say that's okay, that's actually normal, it's not a problem. What we want to do is encourage people into that space and help them grow a sustainable big business. and not maybe just look for the quick exit. So there's a whole lot of things that will develop over time. Where that's going to end up, not really sure. I think it's actually highly possible and probable that we will end up with a really good, strong ecosystem Australia-wide. The size of it will vary in each capital city, and that it will be sustainable for the long term. And I believe once we get some really good, strong success stories in each capital city to be sort of almost like anchor tenants in that city, that will help build things around that, just around their presence and their experience and their run rate, that things will build around that and it will be there for the long term. It will evolve and change, but the Valley's evolved and changed too.
Fantastic. I promise the opportunity for the audience to ask some questions. Has anyone got a question to get us off now? Our helpers there have roving microphones, so please wait and just let us know who you are when you ask the question.
Hi, Sally. Thanks.
Hey.
David here. You've got a room full of wonderful University of Melbourne entrepreneurs. I'm hoping for some pragmatic advice on if you do have a startup or something like that. We all know Google does tend to buy up a couple of these startups every now and again. What would be some of your advice for maybe approaching Google or some of the pathways? Or maybe there's a use case or something you could tell us a story about how a company has made their way into Google as a startup and all the rest of it.
I'll have to, I'm sorry, this is probably not going to be the happy, optimistic story that you want. Google is probably not going to buy your startup. Look, the reality is we do buy startups. We don't invest currently in Australia in startups, by and large. Google Ventures isn't operating here. They're only operating in the US currently. Will that change? Perhaps. I don't know that it will in the short term. My best advice would actually be is that if your exit strategy is acquisition by Google, your first exit strategy should be to build a really big and profitable company with lots and lots of users, because that's what's going to interest us. Maybe it's going to have to be in a space that's really aligned with us. It's unlikely for a lot of companies in Australia. We get approached, and I will probably get approached after this event with lots of people to pitch at me, and the answer will probably be sorry. I just want to be really realistic about that. I think if you shouldn't be focusing on an exit to Google, you should be focusing on building a big business and building a profitable business. I think if that's your goal and solving a problem that you're passionate about solving, I think if your focus is there, all sorts of wonderful things will happen in terms of exit strategies for you. And I think all sorts of wonderful things around funding will happen for you. I think all sorts of possibilities about profit will happen for you. But if your focus is on a buyout by Google, I think I'd question where your focus really lies for starting, because it really should be about solving. I can guarantee you that nobody that we acquired in the last month or year was focused on getting an exit to being acquired by Google. They were focused on solving a really hard problem, acquiring users and building a company. And acquisition came of that. And I think that's probably true in most companies, to be honest. So that's where I would say focus your attention on that.
Okay.
Hi, Sally. My name's Ashley, working as a doctor at the Alfred Hospital here in Melbourne. The question I had was, so it sounds like you guys have a lot of fun at work.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know how you managed to preserve such a strong culture of teamwork when the room's full of very bright people. I'm sure it gets competitive with brilliant ideas floating around.
Oh, look, that's it. So culture is actually really critical to success at Google. The first thing that we do is we are very, very deliberate about our hiring. We spend a lot of time reviewing resumes. We spend a lot of time interviewing. We spend a lot of time calibrating our interviewers. We would rather be short-staffed than have the wrong person join us. We want people that fit. Not only have they got to be smart and really think innovatively, but they have to fit in our environment. They have to be able to thrive, because we want them to be successful as much as we want, to work with them. So we don't want to hire somebody that's going to fail at Google, because that would be a miserable experience for both parties. So we spend a very, very long time trying to find the right people. Once we've got them and we onboard them, we spend a very long time, like the whole life cycle is about nurturing and keeping them. So there's a lot of internal tools and incentives we have around motivation for keeping people and keeping them engaged in what they're working on. But I think for me in engineering, I think one of the biggest things is around the culture. There's a couple of things that really lend itself both to innovation but also to keeping people there. We hire people that want to solve problems. By nature, they just, any problem, you could throw it in front of them and they're just like, I just want to fix that, I want to solve it, I need to work on it. And so giving them the space to do that and giving them the opportunity to work on really big problems is, I think, one thing. So they get really interesting work. The second thing that we do is we allow them to have an opportunity to influence that work. So it's very bottoms up. You know, from a top-down thing, yes, the company direction, and there is a sort of a global OKRs of this is where we're going, this is the broad sort of strategic direction. But you know what, it's not just top-down, it's actually bottoms up as well. So everybody gets to have a say in that and say, what's my personal stake in the game in this one? Where am I pitching? What am I going to do this quarter? One of the things we do that we set our own individual and team and company OKRs, objectives and key results each quarter. And one of the views that we have in that is at the end of it, when you grade, you shouldn't get a 1.0, meaning that you've achieved it. Because basically at Google, that means you really haven't set it hard enough or high enough, and you haven't set the bar far enough. We want people to think 10x, or moonshot thinking is a word that we use a lot internally, and we're starting to use it quite a bit externally. But we want people to think bigger. We don't want small incremental improvements in what we're doing. We want them to come up with the big idea and really go for it and drive that. So that's something that we really encourage, and you're allowed to fail in that process as long as you fail fast and you learn from it. That's another thing. I think the third thing that we do is just the way in engineering how we're structured. So while we have very big product areas that, you know, might be his geo, within that, the actual team that might be working on a part of a product or a product might be only 4 to 6 people. It's a small team. And they work collaboratively. They kind of follow some of the lean startup models a little bit. A lot of things they do is they have daily stand-up meetings. They are collaborative. Information is shared freely across the organisation. That actually transforms innovation. If you know what everybody else is working on and you can look into their design docs and you can see what they're doing, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Stuff isn't siloed off, which can happen sometimes in other institutions. You know, people are very protective of their work. We're not. We're very open slather with it. And I think that sort of really helps build a culture of trust and innovation and empowerment. I go to my boss and pitch ideas and he says, yeah, go for it. You know, I'll have the 30-second elevator pitch and say, I want to change how we do computer science education in Australia, and I want to do this, this, and this. And he's like, great, go for it. And that's it. That's my mandate to go. So those kinds of empowering your staff, hiring people, investing in them, and then letting them loose on big problems is really actually kind of cool. And you're empowered to do it. It's really an amazing thing that you can actually influence the direction that your team or your project is going. So I hope that kind of answers the question. I'm pretty sold. But it's not perfect though. It's not utopia. We still do have a little bit of red tape. It's just a lot less than anywhere else I've ever been.
Yep.
Hello, my name's Scott. One of the interesting things that you mentioned early on is that Google has a very strong networking division in Australia. And I'm curious, with networking, there's some new developments happening over in the US around software-defined networking. I've been trying to work with universities to bring that into Australia, but haven't really had much success in that. I'm curious to know your thoughts on the need for that in Australian universities so that we can build up that expertise in Australia.
Look, I'm not a networking expert, sadly, so I'm probably going to flub your question a little bit, but I'm very happy to follow up afterwards. I do have a colleague who works with me who does a lot of work in networking engineering, and particularly on open source things. And he has been working very hard to look at some stuff in that space, so maybe that's a conversation we could follow up afterwards, and I can put you in touch with him and we could have a bit of a further chat about it, mainly because I don't know the answers and I'm very happy to admit when I don't know them.
Is that another cultural trait at Google?
Yeah, actually that is probably, like, I mean, it's okay to admit where you don't know things. And I think, honestly, a lot of the time the person next to you in the room is going to be smarter than you. And if you assume that you can learn something from everybody around you every day, it's a pretty great place to be. And you just don't know who you're going to sit down next to in the lunchroom. Like, that's the crazy thing. If you visited Google Engineering in Australia, like last week, I could have taken you up to the lunchroom and you could have sat down across from Rob Pike. Now, for the software engineers in the room, hopefully that's a name that you all know. For the rest of you, you can Google that and find out. But you know, there's some crazy, amazing people that have invented all sorts of programming language and things. One of the guys that was the inventor of Tetris works in the Sydney office, Vadim. It's kind of like you sit down and you're like, you did what? I played that all the time. Like, seriously, you invented Tetris? What? It's pretty cool. Just geeking out there, sorry.
Yeah, that's cool.
Thanks. Excuse me. Peter Chapman. Sally Ann. Yep. Sally Ann, you mentioned the importance of in creating ecosystems about focal points and community. Probably one of the greatest examples is Google Campus in the UK, how they started that model and it effectively created a place where people could grow around. Is this something that Google plan on rolling out around the world? Is Melbourne an opportunity where they could bring a Google campus?
I was waiting for that question. So look, I've been to Campus London and it's amazing, it is great. When Campus London started, it actually filled a hole that was there. There wasn't any other tech sort of co-working spaces in that vicinity and in that area. And by planting that there, it has actually created a whole community around it. It's not a model that we're planning on rolling out anywhere further yet. We've got Campus London and Campus Tel Aviv. But one of the things that I think when I look at the Australian ecosystem is actually we've got, and Melbourne and Sydney especially are both incredibly strong in this space. We have some really fantastic co-working spaces in both cities. And so in my mind, I would not want to take from that. I would like to work with those co-working spaces and encourage them to grow and develop. I think there's a great diversity in them too. Both Sydney and Melbourne, and I can almost talk interchangeably about them because I think they both have different, they have some that are very tech startup focused and there's others that are a lot sort of in the digital media space, if you like, or the design space. And I think they both serve different purposes and different audiences. I think what worked for Campus London and what I see working here in the co-working spaces we already have is that bringing people together and allowing them to build a sense of community really, really helps them build their businesses and build their ideas because they get to have those conversations. They're essentially mimicking, well, they're not really mimicking, but they're doing something that we do at Google every day. You know, we have a free lunch every day. It's not just so that they feed us and we never leave the building, although I suspect that that is part of it. It's actually about sitting down with your co-workers and having a conversation away from your desk and away from the confines of traditional work and coming up with crazy and novel ideas. And it's really interesting what comes up at the lunchroom as an idea that will end up being a project sometime. And I think co-working spaces actually do something similar in allowing people to have that water cooler conversation, that online conversation within the community. So for Australia, because this is something that is actually in my remit to do, my focus is actually on helping grow the co-working spaces here as much as I can. So there's various initiatives that I'm working with individual co-working spaces and trying to support them where we can. But we probably won't do a campus anywhere else at this stage. That may change in the future, but at this stage there's no global plans to do more campuses. But I don't think we need it. We're great here. It's kind of, honestly, it's great, but Melbourne's doing so well in this space. It really, really is. If you haven't visited some co-working spaces, hit me up later or hit up Mike. Mike can tell you all about them. So
It's just
awesome.
interesting to see
Yeah.
the difference from Campus London. It's very structured,
Yeah,
whereas Melbourne's a little more relaxed, to be honest.
that's part of our Australian psyche too.
Yeah.
We want to turn up in our thongs and things to work. So
Actually, it's a follow-up question. Probably compared to the London campus and compared to what the ecosystem here, one of the things which is really lacking is people's ability to convert ideas very quickly to prototype and have people. So if you look around the world now, in many places there is significant places where you can actually go play with design and actually tinker with things and actually get a very almost close to your product, a prototype. Then it's actually easier for people to see whether this idea is going to fly, and then they can actually gauge attraction. So there's certainly that area is actually is still not really visibly present in Australian landscape. And I think that's a significant difference to some of the world's, the innovation hotspots as such. So is there a role for Google to play in that? You said, the London,
Yep.
it's a spot that you pick on because it wasn't there.
Yeah. So London, to be honest, it's really like a giant co-working space, right? There is actually accelerators and other programs in there. It's not a tinkering space in the sense of a maker space. There isn't maker equipment there. The maker movement is really interesting globally. That's seeing a real renaissance or a revival, I think, which is great. If you're ever in San Francisco around the time of Maker Faire, and I think it's usually, I want to say around May, it's a wonderful thing to go to. It's kind of crazy. But this whole maker movement, I think, I actually do think that there's a very strong part to play with it, especially if you're looking at tech startups and you're looking in the hardware space. There are pockets of it happening. I know of co-working spaces, or they're not really co-working spaces, but they're maker spaces. There is definitely some in Melbourne. There's definitely a handful in Sydney. There's definitely one in Adelaide. I know Canberra is starting to do that as well. I'm not sure whether Google has a role to play in that. I think we'll see over time. I'm certainly interested if somebody is doing something in that space. I'm certainly interested to have a conversation with them and see what our role might be. But I don't know that that's something that, I don't know. I'd be open to exploring it though. I think it's an interesting idea. I'd love to see that focused a little bit more on youth. To be honest, I think getting kids involved, one of the things that we know is to grow the tech ecosystem here, we have to have a lot more tech startups starting. I think it's like in the Startup Economy report, it's like 4,000 or something that we need, right? Because a lot of them aren't going to succeed. And so to get the success rate we want, we have to actually have a lot of failures too. So we need to encourage a lot of people to try and start up as young as possible, I think, because that's when the risk, at that time when you're young, when you don't have a mortgage, kids, all the rest of it, the risk is a little lower, and you tend to be a little bit more fearless, which I think is a good thing, right? Being fearless is a great thing for an entrepreneur. So don't lose that as you get older, because it's very easy to lose. But I think if we could encourage that into teenagers, I think particularly before they get to university, we would see more of them coming in and doing some really interesting double degrees maybe around, computer science or engineering, and maybe business and entrepreneurship or something like that, and having them kind of play and make and experiment and coming up with things. I think that would actually be something that would really excite me, because getting kids involved at a younger age is really important for this ecosystem.
This is probably where the Dean of Engineering would want me to plug our Master of Engineering with Business, which launches next year.
I didn't know, but yeah, go do it. Do computer science in it too. Sorry, I probably shouldn't be saying that.
I got a couple of, but I'm going to go over here and then I'll come over here. I think it works.
Hi, Sally. Sorry. Hi, Sally Ann. Thanks for coming down to Melbourne. I'm Andrew, also from the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne. And my question's about how to encourage innovation and attract devs to areas that aren't so sexy or glamorous, that don't have maybe lots of money, such as public health. Do you have any ideas as to how we might be able to foster innovation in that area?
Absolutely. I think there's a couple of things that you could think about doing. One is what I know to be true, at least of Google developers, and pretty much every developer that I've ever met, they love solving problems. So defining the problem that you're trying to solve is really, really important, and that's what they're attracted to. They're attracted to big, meaty things. I think the second thing is in the public health space, there's a lot of opportunity. You have a lot of data, I'm assuming, as well. So one of the things that you could look to do is what data can you make accessible to developers? And give them an opportunity to hack upon it, basically. And hack in the sense of make something from it. What could they do in that space? There is a great opportunity to do something like a verticalised startup weekend. So startup weekend is... so Startup Weekend, 48 hours of hacking around an idea. If you do a vertical that's around public health, or if you have data that you could make available, There are organisations and people who would love to get together. You know who I'm going to nod to right behind you. You should meet Flanders right behind you, who does a lot of work in the GovHack space and open data. But if you've got data that you can open up and invite developers in for a couple of hours, a couple of days, I would suggest over a weekend to hack on it, you'll get some really interesting ideas. And if you do it in a sort of a framework that allows them to go from pitching ideas and brainstorming and you know, ideating, to use that term, or ideation on day one or evening one on a Friday, through to working through to it and then having something on Sunday, you might actually get ideas that want to go on and develop to be either companies or research projects or something further from that. So that to me is a really good space to start. I think a lot of developers don't know the data that's available, and they probably don't know the problem space either. So being able to expose them to that and show them the opportunity. People that are developers in the startup ecosystem, one, they're really smart, but two, they'll identify problems straight away and be like, oh, I just want to solve that one. And they'll come up with things that you're not even thinking about, which I think is really, that's where it gets really exciting, right? That's where it gets fun and energetic and crazy. And so GovHack is one of the attempts, and I definitely suggest that you speak to my man Flanders right behind you afterwards. But GovHack is one of those attempts where they, I would say not an attempt, it's one of those actually exercises that they do every year around Australia to help bring out government data and invite developers to come in and hack on it over a weekend. And it's phenomenal what comes out of that. So I think that's a really good model that you could definitely look at and explore.
Over the back here. Oh, sorry, you're next, sorry.
Hello. You mentioned some incentives around youth.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if there's any big projects around women, maybe, in that area, both tech and entrepreneurial, so the startup world.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's lots of stuff for women out there. I think one of the best things about being underrepresented group in the tech space, which women are, we're going to change that, that's one of my missions, is that there is actually a lot of support out there for you. There's a lot of support out there if you know where to find it. There's a lot of networking opportunities. There is female founder meetups. They're both in Sydney and Melbourne. Ladies of York at York Butter Factory meet every month. I haven't managed to be down here on a date that happens, but I am determined it will happen in the future. There are female-funded... Now I'm really... It's too many F's in a sentence. There are funds that have just launched in Melbourne, and particularly for female entrepreneurs. Women in Heels, Business Chicks. Telstra runs the Business Women's Awards. Most of the banks have programs. Deloitte has programs in this space. Google does have a meetup. It is because we're in Sydney, it is Sydney focused at this stage. But I'll give you a plug, and no one else has got this because I haven't launched it yet. But we are going to have a Women for Entrepreneurs Google for Entrepreneurs Women's Meetup, which is going to be a half day focused on female founders, and that's going to be on the 1st of October in Sydney. So if you'd love to come up from that, see me afterwards and I'll make sure you get an invite. It's a free event. It's not about Google Technologies. We're putting female founders on the stage and we're going to get them to share their experiences and create an opportunity for people to engage and share about that. Is there more we could do in this space? Absolutely. We're still trying to figure out who are the best people for us to partner with. Google's best method of scaling in this space is to work with partners, and so we work with a lot of universities, we work with a lot of co-working spaces, so the goal is to figure out what's the model that helps us scale that out as well. So
I'm actually going to organize the first Startup Week in Women here in Melbourne.
Fantastic.
So please come join us.
Please let me know, and if you let me know in advance, I will keep the weekend free and I will come down and I will be so noisy and excited you will never invite me back.
I'm just going to do one here and then the end. Sorry.
Tom Williams. I manage a program called Molecules to Medicine that trains medical scientists how to commercialise their innovations. And I think it would be fair to say in the medical research space that we have world standard fundamental research, but we're not doing so well in commercialising it. You've touched on some of the points, but I wonder whether you'd like to summarise, not just within medical research, but across the technical innovation space. What do you think is missing in Australia at the moment, apart from lack of funds, to get us to be more successful in taking those ideas through to successful products and growing companies that stay and grow inside Australia?
So with the full disclaimer that I'm not an expert in the medical research space, my limited understanding is that funding isn't actually a fundamental challenge in that space to get something from idea through research, through testing, through to actually commercialised product out on the shelf, so to speak, in the broadest sense of the word. So that is funding is a big, much bigger challenge in that space, because MVP is a lot harder. I actually think one of the biggest shifts that we have to have in Australia is around our culture. I think we are. There's probably a few things here, and I want to really kind of be careful about how I say this. I think we're afraid of failure sometimes too much, and we don't take a risk. So I think we do need to normalise failure as being part of a process. With anything, and the sciences are particularly, I think that's why I'm so excited about the sciences and STEM, or science, technology, engineering, mathematics, for those of you who don't know the acronym. But this is one of the things that I love about STEM, and why I want to see more of it encouraged in schools, is that failure is just a part of the process. Whenever you do an experiment, it goes wrong, 50 times, 100 times before you get it right. And that's okay, it's not a personal thing. Most startups, a lot of them, most fail. It's actually a good stat. Most fail on their first round, and that's not a bad thing. We need to normalise that. In Silicon Valley, if you failed a few times, no one cares. In Australia, we sometimes go, oh, well, you failed, and we've got to change that. We actually have to be very deliberate about changing the culture in that space. And I think promoting STEM education in school is actually a part of that. It's not something that's going to take a long time to pay off, but if kids are more normal, if they see failure as part of a process rather than an individual attribute, they will be much, much more encouraged to try it. I think the second thing we have to do is actually change the idea of risk. I don't think as a nation that we are really risk adverse, but sometimes we behave that way, and whether that's because of failure or because we don't really understand the opportunity before us, I think when we get an idea and we're gung-ho on it, we go for it great guns. I think as Australians we do that. We just don't do it enough. And when I look at why, one of the things I keep coming back to is that people aren't aware of the opportunity space before them. I think about when I was growing up, and I think about most of the people that I work at Google with. These are people that it's in our nature to question everything and to change and to iterate and to innovate. But when we were growing up, no one said to me, you could do a tech startup or you could build a company. It was kind of like, you've got to get a job. You've got to have a secure job. You've got to get a good income. You need to do that for life. And there's still that little bit of that old school mentality, I think, that we have. And I think one of the things we want to try and do is actually change that mentality, so young people are coming through university, going to university thinking, I'm going here as a pathway because I'm going to build my own business, whatever size that may be, and thinking about that. And I think that's at every level, even in researchers as well. Having worked in universities for a big chunk of my life, and having been going down that path to academia myself, one of the things I think we sometimes do is we isolate ourselves from industry. And we forget the opportunity there. And so I think we need to figure out a way of how do we make that exciting? How do we also make, normalise the opportunity for researchers to flow between academia, into industry, back into academia, and still have a career? It shouldn't be this tenured track of you've got to stay in university or you've got to stay in industry. What can we do to sort of make that pathway easier in every discipline? Because I think if we start doing that, we'll start seeing some really interesting things happen, because academics will get a better understanding of what's really going on behind the closed doors of big industry, and industry will kind of get the idea, a better understanding of what academics are thinking about and the radical ways that some of them are thinking. So I think those are sort of some of the things I would focus on. Not an easy challenge, though.
Down the end there.
Hi, Sally. Dan Farn, Rostercloud. Question around getting larger businesses to act more like Google in that startup way. Google sort of grown through that online space. What suggestions would you have for companies that are trying to transition onto that online space, but are still slowed down by that big business red tape mentality.
So can I clarify, are you looking for getting them more involved in the startup ecosystem, or you're getting them to change their culture?
Change their culture to match online world.
Man, look, I think if you, I guess if I was in knowing what I know now and the experience I've had at Google, if I was in another company that didn't think that way, one of the things that I would be trying to do is encourage small pockets of experimentation. Change is really hard. There's a wonderful book out there about change. If you've never read it, it's called Switch, and it's by, I want to say,
Chip and Dan.
thank you. I was going to say Dan and Chip something, and I was going to get it the wrong way around. But Chip and Dan Heath. It's a wonderful, wonderful book about looking at the bright spots and finding something that works and amplifying and doubling down on that. Big companies by nature, change is a really hard process to go through. So is there an experiment or something that we can encourage them to do in a small way to get them to have a little taste of success, and in the midst of celebrating that straight away, then sort of spur them on to the next thing? It's very rare for a big company to be able to roll out change over a massive change without a very long timeline to lead into it, and a lot of work. And cultural change especially is incredibly hard. So having small pockets of things and shining a light on them, I think, is one thing. I think the second thing I think is really interesting to explore, and this is certainly something that I've been talking to city councils about and things like that, and I know that a lot of people are talking to them about this space, is, you know, city councils are a great example of an organisation that wants to change and wants to become really, really relevant in the digital economy now. And so they're putting a lot of thought into that space. And one of the things that they're doing, and even state governments and the government, around things like GovHack and things like that, putting your data out there, letting people hack on it, I think, and seeing what comes of it is a really interesting idea. Some big companies are in a position that they could do that. Not every company is going to be able to do that depending on what they're doing, but I think exploring those opportunities of where can you open up something and maybe invite some startups or invite some entrepreneurs in and explore the space and see what ideas come from it. So they're kind of the two areas I would start from. If they're not in the digital space and they're not online and you're a big company, I question your roadmap for the future potentially, because I think you know, the world is a global, the world has shrunk in size in terms of being able to reach people instantaneously all the time, anywhere now. And I think if you're not taking advantage of that and factoring that into your business model, I don't know why. I'm trying to be nice about it, but I would really question, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, that's one of the things that excites me the most about the potential of the startup ecosystem in Australia, is the world is a much smaller place these days. There is no reason that you can't build a global business from anywhere in Australia right now. Once upon a time you would have to go somewhere to get every single customer and visit with them, and you may still have to do that, that's absolutely realistic, but you can build something here and sell it to the world. And that couldn't have happened 20 years ago, not that easily anyway, so yeah.
Going to go to the last one or two questions. Drew.
Thanks, Charlie. Drew Williams of Kennedy Needham. Going back to your pet topic of youth, but resonating with what you've just been saying about cultural change in a company. Changing children's mindsets. I've had the pleasure of working with Scott Flansburgh, the human calculator, who's the second 5-year term global ambassador for athletics in Sydney. He says, I have to be in front of children at least as young as 7.
Absolutely.
You have a room full of ambassadors. Can you provide some quick anecdotes to inspire the room about that?
Yes. Do they need to be about 7 or they need to be any age?
Young. Just
Yeah.
youth, generally,
Okay.
just to inspire them to at least try.
Okay, awesome. Let me give you an example that's slightly older than a 7-year-old, but one that I love. So I am Google is a very strong partner with First Australia, First Lego League. So they do robotics competitions and programming competitions all the way from grade 2 up to year 12. Love them. Not-for-profit organisation. They're all over Australia. They should be in every single school as far as I'm concerned, and I have absolutely no problem saying that in public record, and then also going back to the team and saying, let's figure out how to do this. One of the wonderful things about the challenge is that every year they have a theme to the challenge, and part of it is robotics, but another part of it is a project theme. A few years ago, the theme was something around biomedical sort of space. Broadly, it's not quite what the theme was. The team in Adelaide, there was a high school team in Adelaide, who decided that for their project, they were going to research the space of asthma and asthma medication. And now I'm not an expert on asthma, so if I get the story wrong, sorry, it's my bad, it's my interpretation of what I've heard. But basically the problem that they were looking at is young kids, when they are going to school, weren't taking their spaces, which is something that's about this big that helps with the flow of mixing, so I'm not getting it totally wrong, awesome. Mixing the medicine and the air and getting it into the right dosage into their system. And the reason kids weren't taking it was bulky, it was uncomfortable, for a whole bunch of reasons. So they wouldn't take it, so they're taking their medicine, they're not getting the right dose, it's not treating their asthma, problem. So they decided to research this and go, well, is there a solution? So they came up with the idea of a collapsible spacer. This is high school kids. They're probably about year 10, 11 at this stage, I think. So they came up with the idea of this collapsible spacer. They built a prototype. They went on, I believe, Young Inventors. They won it that year, is my understanding. They're now all studying STEM degrees in Adelaide and have a patent out on that actual collapsible spacer technology. And are going to go on. You know, they went to their course. I heard last week from their coach, their former coach, who said, yeah, they were in a class the other week, and it was on entrepreneurship, and they said, oh, you know, the lecturer was like, we hope that, you know, everybody out of this will eventually, you know, build something, and you'll all get patents, and you'll all make companies and whatever. And they were like, we've done it. And I just love that, right? Like, that's crazy. A robotics program that got these kids excited. And there's so many stories like that. There's kids out there that have built, you know, phone apps and crazy things like that. But that one is one that I heard it last week, so it's really resonating with me personally at the moment and making me want to get more involved with First Robotics. So, you know, I hope all of you want to get involved with First Robotics. You should tweet me afterwards or hit me up on Google+, and I will put you involved with them, and you can start a team and work with people. But I think this is really, really exciting. I think there's another organisation that we partner with really closely too that I'm really excited about, called Club Kidpreneur. And this was started by Creel Price. So Creel Price is a pretty successful entrepreneur, started a business on $5,000, exited for, you know, I think it was 100 million or something like that. So yeah, not too shabby. Did really, really well. And one of the things that he's really passionate about is youth entrepreneurs right now. So his program, Club Kidpreneur, has this business in a backpack, which kids in grade 5 and 6 can get, and it has everything that they need to know about running a business and building a business in a backpack. It's a really, really cool idea. It takes them through, you know, things like how do I come up with a logo? Why is marketing important? Why is having a brand image important? And they have a little shopkeeper's apron and little crayons that are they're iron-on transfer type things. So you design your logo in your workbook, then you put it on your little shop market's apron, because when you run your market day, you're going to need your apron and your brand. It has business cards. It has this whole model of, you know, it talks you through what do you need to do. You need to look for cost versus what you're going to sell, and that's what's your profit and what's your time, and takes them through the basis of running a business. And this is aimed at kids. Love the program. They run kids camps around Australia. So I think those sorts of things, we've got kids that are coming through those programs that are saying, I did my market day and I made $250. And for a kid in grade 5, that's pretty awesome. Like, that's pretty exciting for them. And it's giving them a taste of, you can do this, you don't have to fail. So all that stuff is available online free, by the way, Club Kidpreneur as well. So really good program. So that's probably another one that I would think about. Is that enough examples for the moment?
Okay. I think we'll have one more question. There's one. Okay, one more there, then we'll call it.
Hi there. Jan Burden from Billcap. We're a local software company in the energy space. You've been talking a lot about change at the individual level and at the company level. We all have the misfortune of going through an election campaign right now.
Oh, don't get us started.
No, I'm getting started. I've got one message around that.
Yeah, no, well, and I guess that's it. I guess the question is, if you did have the misfortune or fortune of being Prime Minister for a day, what policy would you implement or change, or would you do nothing?
Oh, if I was Prime Minister for a day, look, honestly, I wouldn't want the job, to be honest. I have to be really frank, because I shouldn't say this, but I get really gung-ho on my ideas, and I don't think I could collaborate with a lot of the constituents.
I'll give you the chance of being emperor for a day.
Yeah, emperor for a day. Honestly, one of the first things I'd love to do is make maths compulsory to Year 12 again.
Yeah.
Honestly, if that was the only thing I could do, I think that would make a big difference in people's lives. I think there is absolutely no reason for any child to be illiterate with numbers. And I think it doesn't matter, it's not about computer science in this space. You know, we are hearing from heads of digital agencies around Australia, this is a conversation I had recently with a colleague, saying they can't find people to work in their advertising agency because they can't do data analytics, they can't do the math, they can't crunch the numbers. It's not enough to be creative, it's not enough to have anything. It doesn't matter what career you want in the future, you need to have some math. You don't need to be a math guru, but you need to have some. And so if I could do one thing, that would be where I would start. And I think that would be a bloody good start, to be frank. But I do want to say vote below the line, make your preferences count, Cluey Voter.
Clueyvoter.com.au?
I think it's something like that. Just Google Cluey Voter. But if we are, in all seriousness, I'm not going to get on a political bandwagon. Make your vote count this weekend. Please vote below the line. Even though it's really, really long, it is important to make your preferences your preferences. That's my personal opinion, not anybody else's.
Okay, and I think we have our last question over there. Yep.
Hi, Sally-Ann.
Hi.
Thank you for being here tonight. My name's Oscar Trevathan. I've got a question around funding.
Yes.
I know we've touched on it a little bit tonight, but I just want to get your thoughts. About 4 months ago, I used to work for a startup, and now I'm working for a big corporate. And I saw a lot of the promising startups would have to go overseas for capital. I guess my question is has a couple of parts to it. First part is, what do you think really needs to happen here to sort of keep the innovation and the strong ideas within Australia and commercialised here? And second of all, we've seen some large corporates like Wesfarmers, Telstra, and Optus also starting funds on the side. Mm-hmm. And I noticed you mentioned before that Google Ventures has, in the long term or short term, no desire to come to Australia, or you don't foresee that. And if you could just provide some light around that position as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So just one thing I want to clarify is in Google Ventures, it's not in the roadmap to go anywhere outside the US yet. Desire or otherwise, it's just not in the plans. We may actually want to do that. It's not that they don't want to be here, it's just at the moment they can't scale that model elsewhere, and we're not looking at that. I think there's a couple of things. I think more success will turn that story around. That is going to take time, and that's not going to help the startups that are looking for funding right now. I think there's a couple of avenues. I think everybody here that is looking for funding can seek out some of the things that the government already offers around Commercialisation Australia and some of the grants processes they have, the R&D grant, things like that. That's not going to solve everybody's problems. Totally understand that. Funding is a challenge anywhere. I think we have this magic image of Silicon Valley where money rains on trees. It really doesn't unless you're a successful founder. If you're a first-time startup there and you've got no runs on the board and you're an unknown entity to everybody, you have to pay your dues just like everybody else and go fight for that funding. I think there are some things that would be really great to explore down the track, and we would love to see change. One of the things that a lot of the VCs that I know really well talk about is there a way to unlock the potential of things like super funds for investing, early stage investing. Now, am I advocating for that? I don't really know. I'm not a VC, but I've heard enough smart people really talk about that space, and I think that would be an incredible opportunity. I know with my super fund, if I could actually figure out how to unlock that a little bit better and invest in some startups, that would be something that might be attractive to me in the long term because I'm in the industry and I really like it. I think we've got to better educate our angels. Angel investment in Australia in the tech startup space is pretty new, like relatively speaking, in terms of years. My boss, when he came back to Australia and moved back to Adelaide, there was no angel investors down there. at all in this space. And when you talk to him about it, and when you talk to some of the angel investment groups, sort of Sid Angels or elsewhere, they're sort of in a learning phase still. Like, they are making investments and they are starting to see returns on those now, but it's still young. It's not, we don't have 10 years under our belt in most of those cases. We don't even have 15 or 20, we don't have that longevity yet. And I think once we start to see some returns on that, things will happen. This year alone, I know of at least 5 new funds that have started in Australia, so that's a good sign. I don't remember another year that that's happened. There probably has been, but I don't remember it. So I think the sad answer is it going to change overnight? No. Is it going to change with whoever gets in on over the weekend? No. But I think it will change over time, and we will see more of that. I think the other opportunity that we have to look at too is really helping people figure out whether they can bootstrap as well. Really good friends of mine, Shoes of Prey in Sydney. The 2 Mikes and Jody, 2 of them are ex-Googlers, started the company. They bootstrapped that for a good, I want to say 2 years, and turned it into a profitable company before they went for funding. And I think oftentimes in Australia we don't think of that model. We sometimes talk about exits, and we talk about getting the model of success is building a company for greater investment. I think we actually need to think about, as some startups out there, actually we need to think about building companies that have a revenue model. And getting dollars coming in, because that will actually give you a longer runway to keep going. And there's no shame in that. I think sometimes we don't do that enough. The companies that do that, from what I'm seeing, tend to be around a lot longer. So I think that's another thing to look at. I think there's other policy things that can be done around co-contributions and things like that from government. When will they happen? Don't know. I'd like to say that things will change in the next 3 years. We will see everything's kind of up in the air until next week, and then it's probably still up in the air after that. I think the other thing is and there is going to be a review around this, is around ESOP and options, share options. I think that's another big incentive, right, for people to work. And there are submissions going on around that. StartupAus is working on a submission in that space, and so are a lot of other people. So I think things like that will help, but I think funding alone isn't the biggest barrier that we have. So, yeah.
All righty. Well, thanks very much for all those questions. I'm conscious that we've got some food and drink next door, and we promise not to keep you all here for too long. And Sally's had a very long day today, so please be gentle with her, but I think she will stay around for a little while maybe. She'll need a drink after that, I suspect. I just wanted to put in one last plug for Startup Spring, which will be happening, as Sally mentioned, in late September, early October. I think it's fantastic, and there's a kind of a beautiful symmetry that Startup Spring is happening just before Melbourne loses itself in the Spring Racing Carnival, which is an orgy of unthinking risk-taking in this country. And if the amount that we bet on the Melbourne Cup every year was invested in startups,
$7 per person in Australia, and we only invested, I think it was $3 or $4 into startups. So yeah, so that $3 that you were going to bet.
You can tell she's from Google, you got the numbers on everything. So I think there's a beautiful symmetry that we're going to be talking about educated risk-taking before we go and take some mindless risks at the race course. So let me ask you all to, well actually I'll throw back to Rowan, who's our MC, to say thank you and announce what's happening next.
As is customary, whenever you invite somebody to speak, you give them a bottle of wine. And tonight is no different. So Charlie, would you please give that to Sally Ann, and please join in me in thanking Sally Ann for coming down tonight.
Thank you very much.
I know you like wine.
I'm a wine blogger, so I'm excited.
Good. Sally Ann did also beat me to the punch. We are having a MAP public forum. Our last public forum for this year will be a part of Startup Spring. One-to-One Cast is one of the companies that went through MAP last year. They raised $250,000 at the conclusion of the program from the Optus Innovate Seed program and also Adventure Capital, which is a local venture capitalist in Melbourne. For our next public forum, we'll have Ed Hooper from One-to-One Cast and Stuart Richardson from Adventure Capital in the hot seats. and we'll be asking them all the tough questions and analysing that venture deal from both sides and asking all of the tough questions and getting into the nitty-gritty of what it's actually like. So that's on Tuesday the 24th of September, same time, 6 p.m. and the same venue. Please come down, and once again, thanks for coming down, and please one final round of applause for Sally Ann and for Charlie.